Okay, so in this next demo, what we're going to be talking about is how to get these animations that we have created in our animation controller for our enemy characters, how we're going to get those triggered with code. And we have a little code that we're going to use for as a tester, and then we're going to set these characters up and write a full code to actually get the enemy to follow our character, or at least I'm going to go over it really quickly. I have my little cheat sheet here on Word. So, excuse me. So anyway, okay, so now, when I'm testing the animation controller, just kind of to see how it's going to work, what I do is I actually have a code that I call the controller tester. If I double click on this and open it up in MonoDevelop, you'll see it pretty easily. So here we go. What I did is start by setting up the public variable enemy animator as the animator itself, and then here I say any enemy animator equals get component and then angle brackets animator, and this is going to take the animator that is on the game object or on the prefab that we're going to use it for, and it's going to put that in that variable. And now I just set up some random keys. Now I realized that I wanted to do like W for walk and D for dying and R for running, and then I realized that's not going to work because WASD is being used by the player controller and my first person player. So I needed to do something else. So I just went down the right side of the keyboard there, P, L, and M, and then with if that input, get key down, keycode.p. With that we have enemy animator. Okay, set the boolean for the under the enemy animator, enemy to walk on to true. So it's going to set that boolean to true, and it sets the other two to false. So what's going to happen is this boolean that we've got here, which is a parameter for our animator or our controller, animation controller, that boolean is going to get triggered and it's going to turn on. And so what's going to happen is you're going to be able to see your character walk. And then if you hit the L for the run, that's going to help that you'll see the character run. And then lastly, if I hit M, the dying animation will play. Now, you kind of have to be careful with that because the dying animation has no transition back. So once you hit the dying animation, your character's done and you're kind of not going to get any more out of it. So let's just test this out. So if I do that, I'm going to take my enemy here, take my controller tester, and drag it as a component over onto this. Let's save, and then I'm going to hit play. Now I can kind of walk around with my first-person controller here, and kind of walk around like that, and going to go in here, just kind of take a look at him, and I'm going to hit P. So I just touch P once, and he walks. He goes through one cycle of the animation. That's cool. And there's the running cycle. That's a little slow, but that's okay. And then P again to walk, L again to run, and then M to die. Boom. Now, I know that he's floating. I understand that. That's going to be a different demo to solve that problem because I have been dealing with this a lot with my students' work, so in their games. So I kind of have a sense of what's going on and what needs to happen. Okay, so we know our animation controller works. Now I could take this code and I could bring it on over to the second enemy that I have, which is the enemy 1 prefab. I'm not going to bother with that. It's basically the same. The one thing that I'd have to be really mindful of is that this enemy object prefab has a melee state on it. That's okay. We're not going to go there. So we're just going to only worry about the one that we're working on right now, because that'll just show you the basics at very worst, and at least you'll have a sense of, you know, what you're trying to do. So let's go back to scene. Go back to our prefab here. I'm going to remove this controller. We don't need, or the component. We don't need it anymore. And now we're going to set our character up so that it will so that it'll be basically be able to be controlled by a script that's going to make it follow our player character. It's going to turn whenever we walk close enough to it. Now, we're not going to do a real AI like where we do like if it sees you or it doesn't, if it doesn't see you or whatever. We're only going to do one where it's just looking, if you walk into a certain area, it's going to sense that you're there, and it's going to turn and follow you regardless. Even if you sneak up behind it, it's going to come find you. So the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to, see, collider under components, and we're going to add ourselves a sphere collider. Boom. Now, usually pretty small, so we're going to beef that up, and then we're going to make it 100. And this is going to be the distance at which, when my player character walks into that sphere, that this enemy will sense my player character, even if I'm coming in from behind it, and it's going to turn and follow me. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that that is a trigger. It's really important. It's not a physical collider. If you don't turn this off, then when you hit the barrier or the spherical collider, the enemy might see you. It'll sense your collision, and it will turn and start to come towards you. But the problem with that is it's just going to keep pushing you backwards. You're never going to get any closer, and so that wouldn't be much fun at all. It'll completely dictate your movements. Like, you wouldn't be able to get away from it. So anyway, something to keep in mind. That's got to be a trigger. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a rigid body. So I'll just type in rigid, and there's my rigid body. And right now we're going to hit our constraints, X, Y, and Z, and we're going to put those constraints right on the rigid body. And the reason for this is actually kind of funny. Now, before we go there, let's just take a look at this. I'm going to save my scene, and I'm going to take my game. Let's just move it over here. And I want you to kind of see what the enemy's going to do here. So if I hit play right now with a rigid body and a sphere collider that's set as a trigger, you'll notice that all of a sudden now my enemy character is just sitting there. I thought it was going to fall through the floor, but it's not. Possibly because of the enemy controller. But what we're going to need to do is, if you don't do that, let's add another collider here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a capsule collider here on the body. We're going to remove this in just a second. Just want you to see something here and see if this works. So if you're not careful, okay, and you don't check this freeze rotation, what usually happens, save the scene here and hit play again. What usually happens here is oftentimes the enemy will fall over. And he's not, which is actually pretty impressive, maybe because the idle animation is taking over right now. If the idle animation wasn't there, I think it wouldn't work very well. But you can see he's kind of floating. That's kind of weird. So we're going to do something better than this. See, and then, yeah, see, and I can get him to roll over when I hit him and everything like that. We don't really want the rigid body to control the rotation like that. We're going to do that with the code. So let's turn that off, and now if I freeze the rotation, those sorts of things won't happen. I'm also going to remove my capsule collider because we're going to do this a little differently. Next, we're going to add a Navmesh, which is going to be our next important thing. The Navmesh agent is actually really important because what the Navmesh agent does is it kind of gives it a basic AI to move around objects that are in its path. So we set it for humanoid, and now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to kind of set up the Navmesh diameter and height. And it should start at the base of the feet and work your way up. So if I increase the radius, you can see that little green cylinder there getting a little bit wider. And then as I increase the height, you can see how that's going to go up. And then you do want it probably around the head. And then the radius, I try to get it just a little bit outside the body. Again, this is just kind of making it avoid collisions with things like trees, houses, walls, that sort of stuff, so that it doesn't go right through. I like to try and keep the arms, like if the arms were down along the sides, that's kind of my marker for how wide to make the Navmesh. So let's collapse that. We can collapse our spherical collider and our rigid body for now. And the rigid bodies are really cool physics-based stuff, and you can change the mass and do all this other stuff. It's actually pretty wild. But we're not going to play with that at all today. We're just more concerned with getting this to do its thing and kind of follow us. Now what we're going to do is we are going to set up a whole bunch of colliders on our enemy. We're going to do something a little more complicated. You can just do a capsule collider, and that will work. And then if you shoot the enemy or you hit the enemy, it will take damage or whatever. But we're going to do something a little bit differently. So if I go in here, let's see, wait, now I don't have, why don't I have the armature body? All of a sudden my armature is gone. You can see it here. The armature in my prefab is gone. I really despise it when stuff like this happens. Drag another one out here. Let's see if the armature's in that one. It is not. Let's take a look at the Blender file and see as to why. That might be the case. No, everything's good. Well, we'll do it on the other enemy though, then instead of this one, just so that we have, so that I can finish the demo here. That's too bad. I'm not quite sure why that happened. I looked at this guy just a little while yesterday, and their armature was there, so I'm not quite sure why. So. Gotta love it when demos go awry on you. So let's go to this guy, and we're going to just really quickly add our components again. So we'll just do our Navmesh agent right there. And get our height up there and our radius right about there. That'll work. Close that. Add our sphere collider. Same basic size. Radius 100. Trigger, and I'm gonna save this and just delete this. This model is so horrible I didn't want to use it. It's something I made in like 5 minutes during a demo for a freshman class. So anyway, so we've got the spherical collider. That's a pretty good distance. Now we're going to add ourselves the rigid body, and we're going to freeze the rotation. And now we can go do the rest of that, which is we're going to go in here, okay, open up the armature, and inside the armature you're going to see all of the bones in that character. In one of my demos on creating characters, I was pretty specific that it's actually really very helpful to name every bone that's in the character, and here's why. Because it would be impossible to really navigate your way through this armature if it just said all bone 001, bone 002, bone 003, all the way, you know, whatever. So that's going to be this is going to be very helpful. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start here at the cannon, okay, which is his left arm, and I'm going to click on that bone, and I'm going to add a collider to that bone. And I'm going to go with a capsule collider in this case. And I can change my height, and you can see how it's going the wrong way there. So I'm going to change my axis to X, and that's actually pretty typical. And then I'm going to take the X-axis and slide it down so that this this capsule collider kind of has, there we go, looks like it's in the center. Kind of extend it out, and then we're going to use this for all sorts of things, including melee damage and shot damage and all that other stuff. So there's that. Now, one of the cool things that you can do with components is I can take it and I can copy that component, and I can go over here to my hierarchy, click on the other one, go up here to the first gear that you see, and paste component as new. And now I'll have a capsule collider on that one. Go back over here to the upper arm, and I'm going to click on new capsule collider. Same thing, X-axis, height, bring the X over, okay? That's good that there's a little bit of overlap. It's not a problem at all. That looks pretty good. You can even have it be a little smaller than the body part if you need to in diameter, but you don't want to do it too much, or else objects might actually like go through it or whatever. So it's probably better just to have it a slight bit bigger. If you're going to do cloth over your character or something like that, this is completely not the right thing to do. I might end up doing a demo just on cloth in Unity a little bit later, but yeah, anyway, so here we go. So I can, you know, this will work for just about everything else. So copy component, go back to the other upper arm, and add that component or paste it as new. Now you can just keep doing this, and you need to. I'm gonna skip ahead, but you want to basically fill the body with these capsule colliders, and because they're attached to the bone, when the character is animated, those capsule colliders will obviously move with the armature just like the mesh does. Let's put our feet in, because right now I think, let's see, just test this. If I hit save and play, you can see how he sinks down to the capsule colliders, because that's where the physics is. So we need colliders down on his feet to kind of help him out. So I'm going to go down here to foot lower, and I'm going to add a component, and a box collider seems to me to oftentimes be the best. And I'm going to make him a little skinnier and bring him and a little longer. Let's see, Y? Nope, X, just like before. So, and then slide that back a little bit. So now I've got this collider that's going to be here on the foot. And one of the important things is you generally do not want it to be going through the terrain. If the collider is already through the terrain, then what's going to happen is your it won't calculate the collision correctly, and then all of a sudden you're going to have issues. So there we go. So I've got that foot collider, and then what I'll do is let's just take this and copy it. Copy component. Let's go to the other one and paste as new. Boom. Okay, so now we've got that. I'm going to save my scene really quickly. And let's go back to my upper foot, and we're going to add, in this case, probably the best thing is a sphere collider. See how this looks. Just to kind of give that a little bit of support, extra support there. Something like that, and maybe a little smaller, and then bring it down. And I'm not going to be too precise with it here, but I might be a little more precise with it if I wasn't trying to hurry through a demo. You get the idea. I'm not going to do the legs here, but let's just copy this one and go to the other foot and paste it along here. Paste component is new. Now, with those colliders, if I center back on this stupid little character here, we're going to hit play, and now he stands on the ground. Nice and simple. And that's going to work out very well for us. So let's just continue with this, and we'll get this all down. So I would go through each one, and I would give a capsule collider in the shin, capsule collider on the thighs. I generally do a capsule collider in the pelvis region going sideways, another one in the abdomen, another one upper chest, and then or middle chest, and then upper chest, and then one vertically in the neck, and then either a capsule or a spherical collider for the head. And then that's basically it. That usually will give your player all the colliders that you need to do just about anything. Okay, so now let's talk about how we finish this off. So we've got all those colliders on there. Now in order for this enemy to see us, the player character, we need to tag our object, the FPS controller, as player. So if you go over here, if you click on the FPS controller in the hierarchy, and then you go over to the inspector, you're going to see tag. You're going to click on that, and you're going to select player from there. Now you're going to hit save. This means now that the FPS controller has a tag of player, and when we walk into the sphere collider, okay, which is around our prefab, as soon as we enter into that, that's going to make the enemy turn and follow us. So now we got a couple other things that we're going to do with our code. One of the other things that I'd like to have here is, the code that I have set up is going to have an audio source. One of the things that I like about that is with an audio source, this is a robot, so I don't think I didn't copy them over yet, but I have this sound like a machine powering up. I think it's important to give your players feedback so that if you actually kind of come into the sphere, there's this power up sound. It goes, whoosh, you know, and then the player knows that they have been sighted. So sometimes, like, let's say if you backed into one of these trigger spheres and you didn't know you had been seen. I mean, it depends on how hard you want to make the game and how mean you want to be, but at the same time, it's, you know, it's probably not a good idea just to make it super mean so that these things can come at you without you knowing, at least not all the time. So I like to have a little sound there that's going to help us know that the character has seen us. So now, once we've got this audio source, what you would do is, what I do is I have another folder. I right click, I create another folder, and I call it My Audio. And I don't have any of my audio files in there, but what I would do is I would open up the audio file. I would have my audio files in here. You can download them off the internet. It's really easy. And you just drag it right into the source right here under the audio clip. And then in the code that you're about to see, it calls that audio clip for the to play that sound whenever you are seen or whenever you're noticed. So now, the code. So we're going to go back to assets, and I have this folder that I created called My Scripts. And in that My Scripts, we have the controller tester that I was using to kind of test the animations. Now we can go back, and we're going to create ourselves a new C# script. This C# script I'm going to call enemy follow. Okay, now I've got two enemies in here, so I might do enemy 1 follow and enemy 2 follow, but for now we're going to just call it enemy follow. And hopefully as you kind of navigate through this, you'll understand what we're doing. It'll help you. You could make changes if you wanted to. So now I'm going to double click on this. I'm just going to copy and paste the code in. The code is actually pretty complicated. Let's go back to Mono Develop here. But I'm going to kind of like run you through it. And there's a lot of stuff in here, but hopefully you'll be able to kind of see what's going to happen. So let me just copy and paste this out of my Word document here. Hopefully the Word document won't screw it up. Copy. And paste. Okay, it did not. Okay, and believe it or not, this is a relatively simple code. And let's just go over some of it for you. So first we're going to set our public animator to enemy animator, just like we did in our testing code. Then we're going to set the rigid body of this prefab to enemy R body. And the reason why we're doing that is because the rigid body is how we're going to alter the velocity and rotate the object to follow our player character. Then we're going to set a public game object as player. Now I could set this to private if I wanted to, and we would never see the variable in Unity, but I like to do this because that way I can watch it in the inspector and I can make sure that it's actually finding the player character. Then we're going to start with a couple of floats: the walk speed of the enemy, the run speed of the enemy, the melee speed of the enemy, and the default enemy distance, the enemy attack distance, the enemy melee distance, the enemy melee rate. Now, let me explain what these are before I go down to the booleans. Number one, the walk speed. That's simple. That's how fast this object or this prefab, this enemy, is going to walk. Then the run speed is how fast the enemy is going to run, and then the melee speed is how fast the prefab is going to come at you when it's under melee attack. Now let me say a couple things about this. You can set all these in Unity. So just because these are set 4, 8, and 6, because they're public floats, we can set them in the inspector for the prefab. So this is just a basic place to start. The public float of enemy distance at 20,000, I just wanted to set that really far away so that when the enemy is first coming in, it's not thinking that it already has found you and starting a weird animation. Then we have the enemy attack distance. This is the distance away from you at which the enemy starts shooting. The script has a shoot script involved in it. And then the enemy melee distance is the distance at which it stops shooting and runs at you and tries to hit you with its fists or a knife or whatever. And then the enemy melee rate is how many times this thing will wait, or how many seconds this will wait before it tries to attack you again with a melee. This is all very simple code, but it will work. Then we have a couple booleans: player sighted, run at player, enemy shooting, melee attack, enemy dying. Okay, those are yes or no. So yes, the player is sighted. Yes, we're running at the player. Yes, we're shooting at the player. Yes, we're attacking them with a melee. Yes, we're dying. And then the death delay. This is in seconds how long the body of the enemy character will lay on the ground before it is destroyed or disappears from the scene by Unity. Okay, then we have a private float, which is our melee timer, which we're going to start down here under this start. So under the start here, we first take player is going to equal our game object, find with tag, quotes player. So we're looking for an object, which is our FPS controller, that's tagged player. Then we're going to take our enemy animator and get that component animator, which is on our prefab. We did the exact same thing with our testing code. Then we're getting our rigid body, and now we're setting our melee timer for time.time, okay? And then player sighted, we're setting all those booleans to false because we don't want any of them to be true right away. So this is our start function, and that's going to, as soon as the code starts up, it's going to run through these. Now we have our update function, and our update function, believe it or not, is actually pretty short and pretty simple. The first thing it does is it's going to calculate the enemy distance, so the distance away from our player. This is always running, so it's constantly updating its distance. Then it's going to set the booleans for the animation controller, okay, and run, walk on, melee on, and die on. And I actually think that I did that wrong. Here, let's see. It's not die on. It is dying on. So I would want to change that, or else that's not going to work. Okay, to the variable enemy dying. So what I'm doing is I'm just setting the boolean that's in the animation controller equal to the booleans that I have here. So run at player is false. All these are false. So then the booleans that are in the animation controller will also basically be false at the very beginning. Now, if the player is sighted, true, and then player found. So that's going to play another void. That's going to basically say, okay, you found the player. Now we're going to go to the void update. If enemy dying equals true, then it's going to play the function enemy dead. Okay, now let's go down here. So that's the end of the update. All it's looking for is the player found and or is the enemy dying. Now we're going to go down here, on trigger enter, collider other. If other is the player, or is tagged player, then it's going to play the audio source that we have on the component on the prefab. This only works once when you walk into the sphere trigger, the spherical collider that we use as our trigger. And you'll notice that I'm not doing anything as far as the player sighted is concerned. And the reason for that is we have another function called onTriggerStay. And these functions are Unity functions. They're always kind of present in the background. That's our Unity engine, okay, running there. And so onTriggerStay, if other compare tag player, then you're setting player sighted to be true. So what this means is while the player is inside the trigger or colliding with that trigger collider, then player sighted equals true. And so what's going to happen is once it sets that boolean to true here in the update, okay, if player sighted equals true, it's going to then go to the function player found. So we'll get to that in a second. Then lastly we have one more function on trigger exit. So if the player exits the collider, then it's going to reset all of our booleans to false. And what that'll do is in our controller here, if all of these are false, it's going to return to our idle state, and he's just going to sit there and look around and do whatever I've animated him to do in Blender. So now let's go look at our public functions, and then we're going to test this and see what happens. So player found, here we have a look at. So vector 3, we're changing and transforming the position of our rigid body with these. Transform.look at position, and it's going to turn our character immediately towards the player. So our enemy character is going to turn around and look at the player immediately. Then, if the enemy distance is greater than or equal to enemy attack distance, it's going to run at us. So the idea here is it's not going to attack immediately. It's going to run at us, and then it will attack once the enemy distance is less than the enemy attack distance. Now, this is where it can get kind of interesting. If you set the run speed of the enemy slightly higher than the run speed of the player character, then you'll never be able to actually run out of the sphere, the trigger sphere, and you'll never be able to run away from the enemy because you're slower. But here, at less than the attack distance, it will start walking. Okay, so enemy shooting equals true. Run at players equals false. Enemy shooting equals true. And if enemy shooting equals true, that is triggered by our enemy walk on boolean. So that's going to slow the character down, in which case we could run away. And as soon as we went past the enemy attack distance, it would start running at us again. It would catch up and it would shoot at us. This makes it a little bit more interesting if you play with these speeds so that the enemy run speed's a little faster than the player character. You can have a little fun with that. And then finally, if the enemy distance is less than or equal to the melee distance, which is the variable that these are all variables that we've set up here, then it's going to do its melee attack. And you can see that underneath each one of these, we have our transform position, transform dot forward, and our run speed, okay, at time dot delta time. And here's our enemy walk speed at time dot delta time. And then finally down here, our enemy melee speed. So this is where it's transforming the rigid body, okay, forward by the speed that we've set up in the variables. And then finally we have if the timer here under melee attack, if the time is greater than the melee timer, then it's time to attack. And so it sets melee attack to true. And then it resets the timer here. And then if not, then it sets melee attack to false. And so what that's going to do is that's going to, up here in the update, trigger the boolean enemy melee on, which will then play that animation of the object attacking us with the melee animation. And then lastly, that's the end of player found. So you can see player found is actually much more complicated than the update or anything else. And then finally we have void enemy dead, and we have our enemy animator to set enemy dying on to enemy dying. And then destroy this game object in the time of enemy death delay. So that means after the animation's done, then the game object is destroyed and removed from the scene after a certain number of seconds, which we have set up here. So I'm going to save this, and hopefully I found all my mistakes. We're going to go back here. I'm going to go into the scene. I've got my prefab selected. I'm going to take my enemy follow. Let's collapse this here. And I'm just going to drag it as a component right into the inspector. I'm going to hit save. Now you can see how I've got all these variables right now. So if I hit play, let's just see what happens. Oh, he's coming at me. It's working. It's working. And now, what's interesting is he's not, that's kind of funny actually. He's not doing his, he's not doing any of his animations. So we need to kind of take a look at what's going on here and why the animations aren't being triggered. But essentially you can see that the booleans are working. So you can see over here in the inspector, player sighted checked, run at player yes. Enemy shooting never got triggered, and melee attack was not triggered, which is really kind of weird. So if I run away, see he's a little faster than I am. Now you can see he is supposed to be shooting. And then he's going to come at me. Now he's running at me, but he's not, the melee attack isn't working. So I need to go figure out why that's not happening. But that's just basically the nature of debugging. I'm not quite sure why that's not working. It might have to do with the distance or whatever. And you can play with these variables here, and you can change them. And so if they're a public float or something like that, and you change those things, as long as you didn't define them again in the start function, then whatever you define them as here will stay in Unity. So it's kind of cool. It allows you to make some enemies faster and some slower, or do whatever you want to do. So one of the things I'm going to do, let's just see. So there's my trigger sphere. Let's take my first-person controller and let's bring this out. Let's just kind of see, am I out of the sphere here? Just barely. let's just play. So boom. There we go. Where is he? There he is. And if I walk into that sphere, boom, now he's following me. And depending upon how fast my run speed is, eventually I might be able to make it out of the, yep, see there, I made it out of the trigger. Let's click on the enemy prefab here and then go back in here. So now we can take a look. If you look over in the inspector on the right, I'll walk in, he's running at me, he's shooting, okay? And then if he gets close, the melee attack is what's not happening. So that's where I've got to take a look at my code and figure out why that's not happening. So let's just see if I can find it really fast, but I'm not sure. So if the enemy distance is less than the enemy melee distance, run at player equals true. So it might actually have to do with my time. So one of the things that I do when I'm debugging is I'm just gonna get rid of this if statement, because that's a problem, right? And then right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say melee attack equals true. So melee attack equals true. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm setting my boolean here. Let's save. And let's go back and let's just see if that gets triggered. So I'm gonna go here. Let's see, let's find him. Let's walk towards him, and then we'll just let him come get me. Alright, so let's just take a look in the inspector here. Enemy shooting. Let's see if the melee attack happens. And it is. And it is. Okay, cool. So something's wrong with my if statement there. So we'll just take a look at that really quickly. And maybe you've already seen it, but somehow, for some reason, my time dot, it's probably my time dot time if I had to figure that out. And I just have to go through and make sure that my code is correct. And that's just kind of the nature of debugging. So I'm not going to waste any more time on this. I think you all have got the idea. But this is basically it. And you just test it, and you test it, and you kind of, creative problem solving. You got to figure out what's wrong. What I just did there by eliminating code and setting my booleans, that makes sense. It doesn't make sense that that the animation controller is not working. Oh, yes, it does. Enemy 1. These are all named enemy 1. So if I wanted these to work, I have to have that. Yep, that'll do it right there. Enemy 1, and I don't think that's going to do anything here, but let's try it. Let's just test it one more time. I know I said I was going to end the demo, but I'm a liar. Okay, so we've got the inspector on over on the right. Let's see, where is he? There we go. So, boom, boom, boom. And he's walking. Yay! His running wasn't happening, but he's walking. Now let's see if he starts to attack us with his melee. And it's not. The melee's not working, and neither is the running. That's really kind of funny. The run did happen there. Oh, he was running at me there for a second. Yeah, he's trying to get me. That's a little too fast. So remember when I was talking in the other demo, if you have something that's a little too fast, you can click on the state here, and I can slow that down, so I can say like 0.60. And I can see if that's like fast enough or whatever. So you have a lot of options to change your animations and slow them down and do all that sort of stuff if things are too fast or too slow. So anyway, hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of how to get your enemy following your character. One of the other things that I'm going to mention right quickly before I leave you here is under enemy follow, make sure that the code is a name that you know, because we're going to make an enemy shooting script next, and it's actually going to look in enemy follow for the is shooting, the enemy shooting boolean, true or false, and it's going to look for it by name in this script by name. So if the name is incorrect, it won't know what script to be looking in. It will think you're meaning something else. So that's actually really important. But hopefully that gets you started. And yay, this is only like the third time I've done this demo. So hope you enjoy it, and hope you learned something. Have a good night.